What's happening, everyone? This is Matt on the Vinyl Head UK channel. And it's been a bit of a minute, right? It's been a minute since I've done one of these videos. So I've been away on holiday. I've been working at some music festivals. I've been living a bit of a normal life again after the last 18 months of craziness. It's been nice to do some normal things again. I've barely stepped foot in my house in the last couple of weeks, which means I haven't been able to do many of these videos. But rest assured, we've got a few lined up over the next few weeks. Whilst I was away on holiday, I also got a chance to go to some record stores. I also got a chance to go to a record sale and find a whole bunch of records for really, really cheap money. Free for a $5. I can't knock that. I'm going to be showing you some of those records, as I say, over the next coming weeks. But the record that I have here today for you guys is the first solo album by a guy whose band that he was with previously I've covered several times on the channel. You're all going to know this guy, whether you like rock, metal, whatever, you're gonna know him. His band before, of course, were Black Sabbath. I've covered some of those. Go and check those ones out. Black Sabbath, Technical Ecstasy, Never Say Die, for example. I've covered those records. But as I say, this is the first solo record by Ozzy Osbourne. And that, of course, is Blizzard of Oz. I picked this one up in a record store back down in the Midlands. I bought a few records that day, actually. This one included. I did a nice haul. But yeah, this is a pretty decent record. It was that transition from where Sabbath were over to where Ozzy was. So if you listen to Ozzy era Sabbath and then you listen to Ozzy solo, I think there's quite a difference in sound personally. Even when Sabbath kind of came away from that sound on the first few records, that heavy doom, the riffs. This transition for Ozzy with his solo stuff was more, I guess, sort of that 80s polished arena stadium sound, very 80s sounding stuff, but we'll come on to that a little bit later. So this was released, it had two release dates actually. So this was released in September 1980 in the UK, in Great Britain, and then it actually released in March of 1981 in the US. So there are two different release dates between the UK and the US. Now, this is not a first pressing. This is a 2011 US remastered edition. And it's on 180 gram vinyl. So that lovely big thick vinyl that plays so nicely. It's not flimsy. It's solid. It's cool. And yeah, Ozzy came away from Sabbath. He was sacked from Black Sabbath back in '79, so he did not mess about, you know, lulling around trying to figure out what to do. He jumped straight into his solo career, and this was released literally like a year after he came away from Black Sabbath for that sacking from Sabbath, where of course we know that Ronnie James Dio came into the band and Sabbath kind of took a different direction with their sound. Very different vocals, I think, between Ozzy and Dio. This is quite a pivotal album. A lot of people call it one of Ozzy's best solo albums. This was a this was a record that featured Randy Rhoads, who only featured on 2 Ozzy records. I think a lot of people still kind of feel that Randy was with the band for a lot longer, but he only actually featured on 2 records before, unfortunately, he was killed in that tragic accident. But I mean, the love for Ozzy to Randy, that I think everybody knows that. That was very, very clear. And Randy Rhoads was an exceptional guitarist, and that really shines through on this record. Again, let's go on to that a little bit later. Let's have a look at what we actually have here. So artwork-wise, that big red Ozzy Osbourne logo with Blizzard of Oz underneath. And then, of course, we have the man himself. Let me pull that in a little bit closer for you guys to see. Typical kind of, it's a little bit cheesy, but it's that typical kind of, I guess, Ozzy trying to get people talking a little bit with the imagery. He's there. He seems to be wearing like a cape or something, holding up that cross. I'm guessing he's in a church or something. A skull situated just behind him there. You know, I guess Ozzy wanting to get people talking. Everyone, you know, back then, Ozzy's a Satanist, Sabbath's a Satanist. But really, when you listen to the lyrics and if you listen to the interviews and books and stuff by Sabbath and by Ozzy, it's quite the opposite, really. So there's our front cover, flipping it over. I see this a lot with these 80s records. A lot of this kind of shot of the band playing live. I've seen it with Priest, Iron Maiden, of course Ozzy right here. Seemed to be a very 80s thing to do, to just get a shot of a band mid-live show and pop it onto the artwork right there. There's Ozzy in that famous kind of, I don't know what you'd call it, what he's wearing there, but you used to see him wear it quite a lot. And just about make out really the other members of a band. It all very much was about Ozzy. As much as we talk about Randy Rhoads being that exceptional guitarist, it was very much about Ozzy. This was his solo career, his solo project. Hence why I think you kind of don't really see the other members of a band in that live shot right there. As we come down, we do have who is in our band. So obviously Ozzy on vocals, Randy Rhoads on guitar, Bob Daisley was on bass, and then Lee Kerslake was on the drums, and then of course Don Airey playing the keys and the synths, which do heavily feature on this record. So, you know, it's an interesting sort of process, I think, in which they actually got to recording this record. Ozzy really wanted to assemble a very strong lineup around him, something he's always done. As you look at even coming into more modern eras, I think for me, the classic Ozzy solo lineup, you know, which I'm sure Randy Rhoads probably would have still been a part of had he been alive. But that classic Ozzy lineup of Zakk Wylde, Mike Bordin on drums, and Rob Trujillo. We all know those guys. Zakk Wylde playing with Black Label Society. I guess Ozzy kind of made him have that break and made him famous. Mike Bordin, who of course we know drummer from Faith No More. And then Rob Trujillo started with Suicidal Tendencies, came to Ozzy, and now we all know with the mighty Metallica. Even with Gus G, when Zakk Wylde came away from the band, Ozzy's always had great musicians around him and spectacular guitarists as well. But Ozzy, you know, coming away from Sabbath, wanting to assemble a solid band, a really good structured band around him. I guess for Ozzy, he had a lot to prove coming away from Sabbath and getting that sacking from Sabbath. He really wanted to make a point in the direction he wanted to go and the music he wanted to create. So most of his record initially was actually recorded in Wales. From there, they moved to Birmingham to start recording demos and also to audition drummers. They had several drummers in mind who they auditioned. Some of them didn't really work out. Some of them were just downright no good and not at all what Ozzy was looking for. And then they finally settled on Lee Kerslake, where at which point they moved themselves to Gloucestershire and rehearsed the songs for literally about 6 or 7 days. They just had that week period as a band to really nail down these tracks before they ended moving to West Sussex to actually record the album itself. So it was quite an interesting, I guess, period of moving about and the process of actually recording this album, recording this record. But yeah, 6-7 days as a band to really perfect these songs, and especially when you hear some of these. I mean, there is a couple of weaker, I guess, filler tracks on it. But when you listen to stuff like Crazy Train, for example, and the fact that they just had that time period to put this album together, it's quite exceptional, really. Let's look inside. We looked at the front and the back of the cover, but we didn't look inside. So we have the inner sleeve right here in white. Again, this kind of plasticky material, which I'm not the biggest fan of. I quite like the paper inner sleeves. It leaves less debris on the record itself. But yeah, we have what we have. Ozzy Osbourne, Blizzard of Oz, bright white. And then we have lyrics right there on the back. We have our lyric sheet. Nice and easy to read. I know some of the records that I've covered, really tough, whether that's the colour of a font against the colour of a sleeve or whatnot, but very easy to read right there. Makes life easy if you're not the best. And it's one of those old-fashioned ones where it labels when the solo is as well. Can't really see it, I guess. I don't know if I hold that in. You can just about see right there where it says solo. Hopefully that's clear and you don't think that the word solo just creeps up in lyrics a lot, because you'll start to be confused why you don't hear Ozzy singing the word solo. But hey-ho. Record itself, as I say, it's 180. Let me find that's side 2. Here's side 1. Quite colourful. That blue label with the yellow and the pink. It is done by Jet Records. Guess right there's the Jet logo. All your usual Ozzy Osbourne, Blizzard of Oz track listing and all the usual jazz. The same is on the flip on side 2, side B. Let me slide that back away. Track listing. It is split on the back of the sleeve right there, rather than just listing all the tracks as one. Side 1, I don't know. Crazy Train, you know, probably Ozzy's most famous solo track along with Bark at the Moon. Goodbye to Romance, D, and Suicide Solution on side 2 or side B. Mr. Crowley, what a track that is. No Bone Movies, Revelation, Mother Earth, and then Steal Away the Night. So 9 tracks in total. Now, coming on to the sound of this record right here, I was a little disappointed when I first put this one on. Initially, I played this on my dad's record player. So I was back down visiting my parents, and I went with my dad and bought this record from record store. Got a few records. And because I was away from home, they have a record player, my parents. I stuck it on there. I listened to it and it sounded a little bit distorted. I thought, okay, maybe it's just down to their record player. I brought it back. I put it on my record player. And again, distorted. I turned it down a bit, which I don't like doing. I like to get a bit of welly with my music to really, you know, have it feeling, especially with vinyl because it's so pure sounding, to feel like the band is playing in my room as I sit there, like a gig for myself. I had to turn it down, and unfortunately there's still distortion, and that is kind of the theme of talking through the tracks in this record. It is distorted. Not all the way through, but there are specific tracks that are. The first track, I Don't Know, and then the last track, Steal Away the Night, were probably the 2 most distorted tracks. As I say, there are passages when it is not very distorted, But yeah, that opening and closing track, it did feel very distorted, which is a shame. As I say, I turned it down and the distortion was still there, which I don't want to hear. I want to hear it clear. I want to hear it pure. That for me is what I want from vinyl. I want it to sound better than any other platform. CD, digital, cassette, you name it. I want my vinyl to sound the best. Maybe it's just this pressing. As I say, it's a 2011 US pressing, a remastered reissue. Maybe it's just that one. I don't know. I'd like to hear a first pressing or a different pressing at least, to hear whether that distortion is just a part of it on the production or whether it's just maybe just this individual record or whether it is that pressing. If you've got a different pressing of this record, drop me a comment. Let me know what you think of it. I've seen some people say it sounds great. Some people say it sounds not so great. Drop me a comment. Let me know. I don't know, as I say, it is a very distorted track, which is a shame because it's a great way to kick into Ozzy's solo career. We come on to Crazy Train, which, as I say, along with probably Bark at the Moon, is, I would say, the most known track of Ozzy's solo career. It's a track that you'll always hear live when you see him. Ozzy's setlist doesn't really massively change. If you've seen Ozzy live, you know what you're going to get on that setlist. You're going to get a couple of Sabbath tracks, you know, Paranoid, War Pigs maybe. And then you're going to get pretty much what you'd expect. Ozzy's not really one to throw in deep cuts or anything. You'll get Bark at the Moon, you'll get Crazy Train, you'll probably get I Don't Know, Mr. Crowley, Mama, I'm Coming Home, stuff like that, you know. And Crazy Train is one of those tracks that you're definitely going to get, probably in the encore. Maybe he opens with it sometimes, but it's a track you're going to hear. Randy Rhoads' solo sits hugely forward on the production, which happens a few times on this record. I think that's nothing to do with the vinyl or the pressing. I think that's just purely the production. But when Randy Rhoads comes in with that iconic solo, God, it gets shoved to the front of a production. It screams out at you. It probably doesn't scream as much as the Saxon record, which I covered, Denim and Leather. Go back and check that one out. They really do scream in an amazing, like, face-melting way. It doesn't quite come through as, like, face-melting, but it does sit much higher on the production and gets blasted. And, you know, he was a fantastic guitarist. Has every right to, I guess. You know, when he drops out the solo, you feel and you hear that guitar sit back a little bit into the mix and Ozzy's vocals come back up. But yeah, there's definitely a push through on the solo, which I guess, you know, we can allow. It's metal. Solos are prominent in metal music. We can allow that, I guess. If you're a guitarist, if you're a fan of the solos, I think you'll be very happy with this. Goodbye to Romance was, I guess, Ozzy's first ballad. Ozzy does do his ballads. I mentioned one a minute ago with Mama, I'm Coming Home. This is our first taste of one on a solo record. This was written very much as a goodbye to Black Sabbath. We all know he came back to Sabbath, then left, then came back, and so on, with reunions and whatnot. But this, at the time, was very fresh. As I say, this came out like a year after he was sacked from the band. And this is him penning a goodbye to Black Sabbath. With, again, the production, the bass comes through very heavy in the mix at times. And then again, just like on Crazy Train, the solo really sits forward in the mix once again. And again, that's not the pressing. I don't think that's not the vinyl. That is purely production. If you were to listen on a CD, I'm sure you would get the same thing coming straight through again. D is a nice little acoustic interlude. It shows Randy Rhoads' almost classical guitar fruitioncy. He's not just a riff master, he's not just a solo master. We've got some classical side to Randy Rhoads' guitar work coming through as well. And then on to Suicide Solution, the track, I guess, that got Ozzy in the most sort of hot water. Ozzy was sued by a family of a male, of a teen who committed suicide. And as was the case back then, and I guess still the case in some cases now, this music was the reasoning why this young man committed suicide. There was a scapegoat, as there was with plenty other musicians. Ozzy, Judas Priest, Twisted Sister, even Madonna. You know, artists like that were often shamed and, as I say, scapegoat for things like this happening. Slipknot in more recent times were another one. And so, you know, Ozzy was sued. I'm not sure whether it was successful or not. I believe it was, by this family, by the parents, blaming this song as the cause to lead this young man to do what he did. Which I guess is an easy scapegoat. The title is Suicide Solution. You know, if there's no other way, then the solution is suicide. This was actually penned, though, about Bon Scott. If you listen to the lyrics properly, Ozzy's singing about alcohol. Bon Scott's cause of death was alcohol related. And so this is Ozzy singing a tribute to a friend of his with Bon Scott. You know, I'm sure Ozzy and AC/DC, or Sabbath and AC/DC, would have been on the road together, would have crossed paths many times. Bon Scott and Ozzy, both wild frontmen. I'm sure they talked on many occasions, and losing Bon Scott had an effect on Ozzy. Therefore, you know, he's penning this song. As often was the case, I talk about, you know, you can make lyrics into what you want. You can put your own spin on them. But I think this was just an easy scapegoat. I'm sure this guy was troubled before. But for the parents who very clearly were not into metal or Ozzy or Black Sabbath, let's put this down as the reasoning why he did what he did. But, you know, it got him in hot water a little bit, Ozzy, you know, with the suing and whatnot. On to side 2, we have Mr. Crowley, who has that big synth opening. Lots of synth in this record with Don Airey and lots of keys. Before we go into that real heavy Mr. Crowley, bam, 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 bam. Really big heavy riff, as I say. It wasn't just the solos we knew Randy Rhoads for, it's those riffs as well. The solo, again, sits very forward in the mix. Comes right through, jumps in front of everything. Kind of makes it almost a little bit difficult to hear other parts of the song when this solo is really going. Another pretty much staple of Ozzy's set, these live sets. A great track, I really enjoy it. No Bone Movies. I think this is our filler for the album. It doesn't really go anywhere. It doesn't really do much for me. It does very much feel like with filler on this record. Then we go into Revelation, Mother Earth, which is probably the track with the most depth to it. There is a lot going on. It's a nice kind of, especially the instrumental passage towards the end, it's a really nice show off of the synths and the keys. There's some really nice passages on that instrumental piece. Heavy riffs, again, coming from Randy. As I say, the instrumental passage, it gets quite delicate actually before we jump back into those heavy riffs again. And then almost straight into it, we hear this big crash of a big cymbal crash, like a gong or something. And we go into our last track, Steal Away the Night, which is a really kind of fun track to end the record on. It's a real nice showcase of the musicians. A lot is always focused on Ozzy, but the musicians, you know, it really shines through with them. There were legal disputes later on. I won't go into all of that detail, but there were legal disputes with songwriting, credits and stuff and all that sort of stuff. But there's some really actually nice Geezer Butler-esque bass lines again. I always talk about Geezer Butler being one of the best bass players in that type of music. He's always very busy, and you can almost hear those geezer bass-esque lines. I don't know if that was intentional or just the way it panned out, if something that Ozzy maybe asked for. I don't know. But yeah, Bob Daisley, really, some really nice bass lines coming through. Again, as I mentioned, it's a track with a lot of distortion. Not so cool. I have to turn it down to ease a little bit of the distortion, but I don't know. Who knows if it's this pressing or what it is, but let me know, as I say, in the comments. But there we have it, Ozzy Osbourne, Blizzard of Oz. The first solo album of plenty by Ozzy as we go through the 80s, getting that classic 80s metal sound. It was probably the soundtrack to many people's teens, I would imagine. The 80s was a real hotbed of fantastic metal releases and metal music. And this is really one of them. Go and check it out. If you're into Sabbath and you never really got into Ozzy, it's a good place to start. Bark at the Moon as well. There we have it. Blizzard of Oz. Thank you as always for checking out this video. There's plenty more on the channel, so go and check those out. Loads of metal, some country, got some blues coming up as well for you guys. A few other kind of interesting stuff. I picked up a couple of records from this record fair which aren't metal or country or blues. So that should be interesting to cover some different stuff for you guys. Subscribe to the channel. Let's build it up as much as we can. Go and like these videos. Hit the bell for all notifications on when content comes out. I've got another one of these vinyl appreciation videos coming up later in the week. But until then, as always, buy metal, listen to metal, buy vinyl and listen to vinyl as well. I'm Matt. I'll catch you guys soon.